Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Sir Hunt on X on this 1st of December of the calendar year 2025. Hope everyone had themselves a wonderful day, a wonderful weekend, and of course, a happy Thanksgiving. Happy Victory Monday for all the teams that won yesterday. And of course, happy Victory Friday for the Cowboys and the Packers who won big. And lots to get to with the NFL here in a second. Big fight signed earlier today. Of course, the wild controversy with Lane Kiffin. I got a lot to say about him. And of course, a wild night in Philadelphia many years ago that just might be the most catastrophic thing in boxing history of its kind. I'll touch on that at the end of the show. I'm going to get down to it. Everyone had themselves a wonderful day today. I'll just get started real quick. It was week 13 of the NFL season. Touch on some of the more key matchups here in a minute. Uh, we know I'll just get the two Thanksgiving ones out of the way real quick. It was, of course, there's a bit of a shocker. Dallas beating Kansas City. Those are the kind of games where Chiefs defense usually find a way to get the key stops. For some reason, they had no answers for George Pickens or CeeDee Lamb. And Dak Prescott just played about as perfect of a game as you could play outside of the opening possession interception. And even though they might not make the playoffs, Dallas is going to crash some parties as the season ends because Dak Prescott, we'd be talking about him in the MVP conversation if it wasn't for how bad of a defense that is and how bad of a start they got off to. I mean, two big wins in 2 weeks. I mean, Sunday and Thursday knocked off the two teams that represented the Super Bowl in the previous one. We talk about Philadelphia and Kansas City. Big win for Dallas. They're still not going to make the playoffs, but they're going to make things interesting down the line. I wouldn't be surprised if they finish with a 9-7-1 record because Dak Prescott's playing pretty darn good. Defense playing a little better, not much, but a little bit. You do have to give them that. And that's what happens over here. That's down the line. But when you talk about Kansas City, it's a no-brainer. You got to win out at least. And I'm not even sure winning out's going to get you into the playoffs because two of the teams ahead of you, that's being Buffalo and Jacksonville, already have head-to-head tiebreakers on you. Your best bet to beat Houston and win out and hope Jacksonville can win the division. And one of those other teams in AFC South, whether it be Houston or Indy, falls to that spot where you have head-to-head tiebreakers. Because if it's Jacksonville with a head-to-head tiebreaker, you ain't you're going in. I mean, it's do or die now for Jacksonville. You got to play spotless football from here on in. The thing is, there was no life shown on the Kansas City defense at all Thanksgiving night at Dallas. That's exactly what it comes down to. So that's what happened at Thanksgiving night in Dallas. And maybe, as I said this the other day, when you've had the championship pedigree for the longest time and you've maintained that roster and then you're going to get back to the top and thinking it's easy, might be time to hit the pause button and realize one thing. Maybe it's the case sometimes you might hold on to the same team 1 year too long and it decays. And maybe that's going on with Kansas City with key parts, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And it showed so far this season, and it really showed Thursday night at Dallas. So we'll see what happens going forward. I'm still not until they're officially eliminated. Don't write them off. I mean, yeah, they have to play perfect ball from now to the end. I mean, they have to win out at least, and that might not be good enough because there's a boatload of teams in the 8-9 win category, and a couple of them behind Kansas City have as many wins, and it's going to get wild in the AFC down the stretch. We'll touch on the playoff picture here in a second, but great win by Dallas. They're still in the hunt. Not sure they're going to get over the hump to get in, but they're going to make things interesting. They're going to crash some parties. We talk about the three-headed monster of Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, and George Pickens. They're going to put points on the board. That's what they've been doing, and they're going to make life terrible for all these teams down the stretch. Now, of course, before that, we go to Detroit. It was the Packers, just second time this season, for the most part, putting the clamps on the Lions. The Bears might have the number one record in the NFC, the number one seed. Doesn't mean they're the best team. You probably are, with the Rams sort of tilting a little bit after Sunday's loss to the Panthers. Green Bay still might have that case. I mean, it's probably the best 2-game stretch Jordan Love has played in quite some time. He showed it here. They're going to Detroit against a division rival. And the defense just basically put the clamps on the Lions offense, which was explosive. but just all of a sudden just fizzed out. And the Green Bay defense was in the backfield at will, finding ways to get to Jared Goff on that offense. And Green Bay is going to be a problem moving forward. Now, people are pointing out the NFC favorites. I won't go that far yet. Still need to see more. Need to be a little more consistent on offense because sometimes they're so hit and miss. But defensively, they can put the clamps down on anyone, anytime they want. And as long as that defense is holding tilt, they're going to win games, and they're going to be a tough out in the playoffs this season. They're going to make the playoffs. I still want to put it past them to win the division because they still have to play the Chicago Bears twice, including I believe the season finale at Green Bay. But the Packers will win the North. Don't put it past them to clinch that number 1 seed. And they're rolling right now. We'll see where they go. And speaking of the Bears, big road win in Philly Friday afternoon in the Black Friday game, or whatever they want to call it. They're just winning. Somebody must have put some extra energy drinks in Ben Johnson to rip his shirt off like Hulk Hogan in the wrestling fraternity, because him doing that little Hulk Hogan pose in the locker room shows you the vibes that's turning in Chicago. Still got a ways to go because you're winning based on devil's magic right now, but you're winning. The culture shift is changing a little bit, but you got to just keep at it. Are you going to hold on to the number 1 seed? More than likely not, because you still haven't played the Packers twice. You still have a home game against Detroit. You also have a couple of other tough games in there. I don't remember how the schedule goes, but you still have a couple of tough games you got to deal with. But Ben Johnson has you guys winning games. That's a good thing. What does that mean moving forward? We'll find out. They'll still be in the playoffs. They're going to get 10. They'll probably win another game or two to clinch one of those playoff spots. Don't know if they're going to win the North because Green Bay's coming. And remember, they got to play this coming Sunday in a giant NFC North tilt, which may be the ultimate dictator of who wins that division. But Chicago is winning. A culture shift is changing little by little, not just overnight, just little by little. It's going to take time for it to fully change. But Ben Johnson has them going in the right direction. Now to the Eagles. They're essentially winning games the way Kansas City won last year, just scrapping. But you've had games especially like the one Friday against Chicago, where you were beyond listless and pathetic, especially on offense, and that's what they were. I mean, they were so heavily reliant on that tush push, and ever since they got too crazy with it, it's like they forgot about offensive fundamentals, and that's why they wound up the way they did. We talk about the Green Bay the Philadelphia Eagles, and we talk about just finding ways to win. Maybe it's good, but also quite probably bad, because I mean you can get all the W's, but if you're getting W's, we know what the old adage is: dub wins cover the multitude of sins. I mean, covers all the faults. Maybe they should have figured out all the faults and find out why they're doing the things they were doing. Because their offense, I mean, I haven't seen it really one game where I can say the Philly offense is back this season. I haven't seen it yet. And I don't know if we're going to see it this season. Hard to tell. But that's what we have going forward. We talk about the Philadelphia Eagles. I mean, they beat Detroit the night before. The defenses stomped the Lions offense. But all that was Dan Campbell going for every fourth down. But what happened against Chicago in a couple other games this season, especially a home one against the Broncos, where they lost in similar fashion, we haven't seen the offense that just exploded to the all the way to the playoffs and win the Super Bowl, where that offense has cranked it up and beat down Kansas City in that Super Bowl. We haven't seen it this season yet. If we're not seeing it at this point, that's an eyebrow raiser. And I know they were calling for their offensive coordinator to be fired because of the cowardice of Eagles fans. But that's what we have right now with Philadelphia. They're still going to win the NFC East because the Dallas Rays got started a little too late. Philly's going to win the NFC East. And I don't know what's going to happen to them moving forward because the NFC is going to be basically a heavyweight fight all over the place. And we're going to find out whether they have the firepower to compete. They did last year, largely because they had home field advantage. They're still in the running, but they might not get to that point. We'll find out here real soon because the playoffs are coming. But a big win for the Bears. They're just winning. You have to give them that. Ben Johnson in the Coach of the Year conversation, turning the team around little by little. Now to the Sunday slate. There's a couple ones to touch on. Of course, it's the Shedeur Sanders saga in Cleveland. And it got a little bit of a humble pie out of it because the 49ers just beat them to a drum. And the game wasn't even as close as the score indicated. The only reason was Brock Purdy's still a mediocre quarterback. That Juwan Jennings is still a mediocre wide receiver. That's why they couldn't beat him more, because they should have kept Mac Jones out there. But the Cleveland Browns defense, they did all they could. I mean, you're talking probably arguably a top 5 defense in the NFL. But offensively, with everything they're doing on, that's why you're at where you're at. I'll touch on the whole AFC North picture here in a second. But it's just an embarrassment. And we talk about the defense doing so much. Second half, 49ers converted 8 of 11 on third downs. And that's why they found a way to win it in the end. Browns defense just been on the field too long. It can only do so much. Myles Garrett can only do so much. But I'll touch on the AFC North, and I'll touch on Garrett in a second. I got a lot to say about something I read earlier this morning. Here's this. The 49ers, the Seahawks, and the Rams, at least 8 wins for all 3 teams. That NFC West title is going to be a wild one. All 3 teams are likely going into the playoffs. And think about it. 3 teams in the NFC division, NFC West, with at least 8 wins. That's how crazy the conference has been all year. And speaking of the Rams, laid an egg against the Carolina Panthers, but I got to say, gotta give credit to the Panthers. They're scrapping. They're finding ways to win games. I mean, they got the big win in Green Bay a couple weeks ago. They got this one here. Hung around with San Francisco for the longest time. Advanced a Sunday, pull a shocker. Now, in fairness, I'd probably say the Rams probably played almost too good all year long, especially Matthew Stafford. He was due for one of these games, especially talking about the crazy interception of the red zone, which made next to no sense. But they were due for one of these kind of games. And Carolina, you got to give them credit. They're scrapping for wins. Don't know who outside of Rico Dowdle, I don't know who's formidable on that roster. I mean, Bryce Young, jury's still out on him. But they got the win. And we're talking about getting this win at home. They're hanging around. They're hanging around the NFC South with Tampa sort of leveling down a little bit. And so that division's up for grabs. But remember, within a couple weeks, I don't know if it's next week or the next, Carolina and Tampa Bay play for that division. We're about to find out. But you got to give Carolina credit. They're just scrapping for wins. I don't know who's on their roster. And, of course, the LA Rams, they're still the team. They're still one of the premier teams in the NFL. They were due for a performance like this because they played too good for too long. And a basic due for one of these. They'll be back up. They'll be fine. And speaking of the Seahawks, just demolishing, basically pitching a shutout on the Minnesota Vikings. This particular quarterback, Max Brosmer, guy doesn't even belong in the NFL. Can somebody explain to me what he was doing with that shovel that wound up in the hands of Ernest Jones, who pick-sixed it? I mean, I know you guys have J.J. McCarthy and you have those problems, but when you don't have a veteran who can be a fill-in and resort to this after what happened to McCarthy previously, have him, out for this game, you can expect this. And that's what's happened in Minnesota. And we talk about the Seahawks is pummeling the Vikings. Revenge win for Sam Darnold, who was basically thrown under the bus by Vikings fans after his performance in the season finale against Detroit last year and the playoff loss to the Rams. And he got his vindication. And now the Seahawks are still knocking on the door for the NFC West. They're battling the Rams. They still have one more game against them when they travel Seattle in a couple weeks. But the Seattle defense, mind you, why maybe the Ravens should have hired Mike McDonald as their head coach. Because look at the defense they had in Baltimore when he was there. And then, of course, he left it for Seattle. Blown opportunity for the Ravens, but it's a golden opportunity for Seattle because that defense is lights out right now. That front seven. We talk about guys like Ernest Jones, Byron Murphy, and DeMarcus Lawrence. They're going after the quarterback. They say defense sets the tones. They do that. That was a big win for Seattle. Bounce back after a tough loss against the Rams. And of course, a big couple more to touch on. It's the Colts and the Chargers. Let's do the Colts, the Texans over the Colts. I apologize. Don't look now, but here comes Houston. I mean, they were left for dead. I mean, the Davis Mills legacy took over. C.J. Stroud came back and picked it up where it left off. And now it's a free. Now the team, the Colts, start a free fall because what's happened? It's simple. The defenses are now loading the box and taking Jonathan Taylor away and are begging Daniel Jones to beat him, and he can't do it. We saw this. This is the same story in New York. It's the same story here. This was going to happen when the Colts play bigger teams with better defenses who know Jonathan Taylor as a focal point. That's what happened Sunday. And no, it doesn't help. Daniel Jones is playing with a fractured fibula. That ain't going to help. You're talking about a potential free fall that could go from, was it 1.8 to 1, 7 to 1, excuse me, all the way to missing the playoffs. I mean, it's plausible. I mean, the defense they're playing the real teams. They're going to scout this team. And that's going to be the game plan moving forward. And that's what the Texans did. Got the big win. They might steal the AFC South. Still got a big game later on the season against the Jaguars for that title. But Houston is back. And if C.J. Stroud can shake off the rust and do what Davis Mills did, they might just steal that division. Don't sleep on the Houston Texans. They're coming. And, of course, the big one last night in Pittsburgh, it's Buffalo over Pittsburgh. Which is going to lead my AFC North segment here in a second. But for Buffalo, Josh Allen, who hasn't looked all that great in recent weeks, started to come out of a shell a little bit. Got the Bills going. Shaky first half. Second half got going. And from that point, after the Bills defense beat up Aaron Rodgers, took over, and the game was basically over. Not as close as the score indicated because the Steelers did really nothing on offense. Just the Bills shot themselves in the foot with pre-snap penalties and and a couple turnovers in the first half. But they got the big road win on to Cincinnati, and they're going to get in the playoffs. Don't know if they can catch New England for the AFC East title, but they're still here. They still have Josh Allen, who's a reigning MVP for a reason, and they showed it again last night. Those are some of the games we're going to touch on. Basically, the teams that have playoff implications. And we talk about teams with playoff implications. Going to go to probably before I get to the playoffs, I'm going to touch on the AFC North for a second because I left a couple of those games out, obviously, for a reason. This division 2 years ago, every team finished 9-8 or better. I mean, the fourth place team was Cincinnati. They finished 9-8. 9-8 may not win the division this season. Talk about a fall from grace. Actually, all four teams, and I'll say this, all four teams, regardless of what happens moving forward, is going to need one of those upscale facelifts moving forward to catch up with the times because their formula that worked 2 years ago to have that sort of a stature of 9-8 or better is why they're in all teams are in the positions they're in. As I talked about with Kansas City, you can probably say this for Baltimore, Pittsburgh, and Cincinnati. I want to include Cleveland because they're Cleveland. You guys had a case of holding on to your key guys and the key parts of that roster a little too long, and it's showing. And because of it, you're going to decay. That's what happened with the AFC North. Think about this. Those same four teams 2 years ago, I mean, I was 13-4 Baltimore, 10-7, 11-6 Cleveland, 9-8, and 10-7 Pittsburgh, 9-8 Cincinnati. That was in 2023. This year, Pittsburgh and Baltimore are 6-6. Cincinnati's 4-8. Cleveland is 3-9 after yesterday. And whatever happens moving forward, and I'm going to say this all due respect to all four teams. I don't care who wins that division because you're going to be one and done anyways because somebody's going to come into your turf and pound you guys. Even at that, all four teams need massive changes in philosophy, a massive facelift in how they approach games, and also an overall massive change an outlook, because what you guys did 2 years ago isn't working now, and everybody's caught up to you guys, largely because a big chunk of mainly Baltimore, Pittsburgh, and Cincinnati held onto their key pieces and thought that was going to be the end all be all, and it was not. That's why we have what we have. What does it mean moving forward? I said, whoever wins this division might win it with an 8-9 record. Remember what happened in 2022 in the NFC South when the Tom Brady led Tampa Bay Buccaneers had an 8-9 record. They hosted a playoff game against Dallas and got clobbered. I mean, somebody is going to have a home game by default because somebody has to win this division. And what's happened in this division from what it was 2 years ago when all 4 teams were 500 or better to now, there's a lot of wholesale changes are going to be needed. I mean, I know all 4 franchises, the fans of all 4 calling for their coaches' heads. I don't know that you should start with that, but it goes beyond that because what you guys try to do 2 years, what's worked for you guys 2 years ago, isn't working today, and there's a reason for it. And it's time for all 4 teams in that division to get down to the nitty-gritty, hard to the bone, find out what the problem is, solve it, and totally make over, because that is what's needed. And it's pretty sad that one of the premier divisions in NFL history, when you talk about, especially talk about the Pittsburgh-Baltimore rivalry way back when they were battling for AFC supremacy, coming down to this. I mean, the only real salvation for this division is if Baltimore or Pittsburgh win out and finish 11-6. But that's not happening because they're likely to split that 2 series coming up. Somebody's going to finish that division with an 8-9 record, maybe 9-8 if Cincinnati wins out, which is doable. But it does not solve anything moving forward because there's a big picture premise that needs to be looked at and looked at hard. And all 4 teams in the AFC North, after what happened 2 years ago, needs a massive facelifting, massive turnover, massive overlook in terms of how they approach this game, because it's not the fact this happened. This has happened when you have key pieces not contributing the way they should. And that formula that's worked 2 years ago, the same key pieces on those teams, they're not contributing now. And that's why the division has wound up the way it is. Maybe the sole exception is Cleveland, because they're Cleveland. We know Cleveland has no direction. Actually, if I said they went south, they traveled south, that would be complimenting them, because Cleveland has no direction. But everybody in the AFC North has to totally rework everything from the organization down to the players. Total changeover are needed for them to get back to being relevant again, because if it's not, this might be the laughingstock of the division for the 2nd straight year next season if nothing changes. All 4 teams have to get to work. Think about it. 2 years ago, you go from having all 4 teams with a winning record to all 4 teams possibly having a losing record. You need to look at how that happened in such fast a time. I'm talking about all 4 teams equally. There's no exemptions. Plain and simple. And speaking of the playoffs, I mean, let's take a look at this here real quick. I'm going to divulge into this a little bit. I talked about it at a little bit ad nauseum. I mean, it's probably the most crazy year I've ever witnessed in the NFL. I mean, the favorites are either on the wild card spots or in the hunt. And some of the teams that weren't even pegged to be in the playoffs are leading their divisions. And then there's a case of the Denver Broncos, who sort of overachieved, getting the number 1 seed. But that defense is lights out. We all know that. The Colts, the Patriots, a lot of people say have a favorable schedule. They've had some quality wins in recent weeks. I'll give them that. I talk about the Colts. They might free fall because the defense is going to stack the box on Jonathan Taylor to limit him to Daniel Jones to beat him. And we talk about the wild card spots. Jacksonville, Chargers, Buffalo. The order, I don't remember. I don't know what it is. I said the AFC North is going to have a default winner more than likely. And then after that, you're talking about Kansas City, Baltimore, and Houston on the outside looking in. 3 of the teams who were, Kansas City and Houston. Baltimore's got the division spot in the AFC North playoff. I apologize. Kansas City and Houston. Kansas City, a lot of people's picked to at least represent the AFC. And Houston, who was an overall picked to win the AFC South on the outside looking in. And of course, Miami's coming on, and you have all of that. That's exactly why they play these games. And it's just crazy. I've never seen anything like it where from year to year, you had a total flip-flop. I mean, this might be a year where I'm going to trace back to the 2012 run of the Baltimore Ravens when they won the Super Bowl under the real Joe Flacco, where he got on fire and just did all he could, did as much heavy lifting as he could to lift the Ravens to the Super Bowl that year. It's going to take someone going on that kind of a run this season to represent the AFC because there's no real clear-cut favorite. I don't know who it is. I mean, the Broncos have a good defense, but what does Bill Nix do at quarterback? They don't have much on offense. I mean, the Patriots have, Drake May and Mike Vrabel, maybe the only elite quarterback head coach duo right now in the playoff hunt. You have the Colts. Of course, you're going to have the default AFC North winner. Don't know who that is going to be. I'm still thinking it's going to be Baltimore. The Chargers, the Bills, and the Jaguars are the wild card spots. But we know the story with the Chargers and the Jaguars. I mean, jury's still out on their respective quarterbacks. Buffalo could be that team. But we've seen the act with Josh Allen in the playoffs before, where he goes 1 minute where he looks like he's going to take over the world, and then he just goes flat on his face out of nowhere. I mean, granted, a lot of that was at Kansas City. We know the story with that hurdle, but even then, you can forget the 2022 divisional loss to Cincinnati where he fell on his face. The AFC, I don't know who you should put your money on, but your best bet is probably keep that money in your pocket. Don't even bet on anyone because nothing stands out. Nobody stands out. That's how crazy the AFC is. Usually by this time, you find out who the real heavyweights are. There's no real heavyweights because the real heavyweights that were pegged to be the favorites are either on the bubble or on the outside looking in. The AFC is just crazy right now, and I don't know where this is going to get us. And on the flip side, let's talk about the NFC. You have 7 teams with at least 8 wins, and you have 2 other teams with 7 wins. We might have an 11-win team miss the playoffs. That's how hardcore deep and crazy the NFC is. I mean, think about it. I mean, you have the 3 teams I mentioned earlier, the Rams, the Seahawks, and the 49ers in the NFC West. All 4 teams are getting in. You have the Tampa Bay and Carolina in the NFC South. I mean, Carolina 7-6, Tampa Bay 7-5. You have, we talk about, I'm looking at this right here. Chicago, Green Bay, and Detroit with at least 7 wins for Detroit, 8 for Green Bay, 9 for Chicago. Dallas at 6-5-1, and Philadelphia at 8-4. There's going to be at least 2 10-win teams that miss the NFC playoffs because it's that loaded, unless someone falls off the map. But it's that loaded in the NFC. And looking ahead, I don't know. There might be just be a default representative in the AFC. Because whoever's coming out of the NFC is going to curb stomp them like we saw Philly do to Kansas last season. I mean, that's how upside down this is, and that's how crazy this NFL season is. And I said the NFC was going to have a stronger conference. I know they was going to have a power conference when you think about all of this. Because a boatload of teams here, they're going to be we're talking about some heavyweight fights in the playoffs in the NFC before the winner comes out of the Super Bowl because they'll be battle-tested. Because there's at least 5 or 6 teams over here I'm looking at that could come out of it. I mean, Tampa, the Rams, Seattle, San Francisco. I mean, Green Bay, who's a favorite after the Michael Parsons trade, still can't write off Detroit. I know I said Philly's not looking good, but they're the defending champs. You still can't write them off. It's going to get real crazy, and we're going to have some heavyweight fights in the NFC come playoff time, and it's going to be crazy. Fasten your seatbelts. Ooh. I'm ready for the playoffs to start. I'm ready for the playoffs to start. Let's get rid of the pretenders, bring in the contenders, and let the playoffs begin. Especially the NFC, where every playoff game is probably going to be a coin flip. I mean, it's going to be that crazy in the NFC. There's no real standout favorite there also. But when you think about it, 6 teams with at least 8 wins, it's going to be nuts. Now to some like college football talk. And finally, Ryan Day gets over the hump in Michigan. Finally. But the job's not done. Win the Big Ten title, and you're going to have a hard test coming up against Indiana. You're going to have your hands full. Not saying you're going to lose, but you're going to have your hands full. You accomplished your first goal to get over the hump to beat Michigan. You did that. Now you got to win the Big Ten championship and go back to win the national title. And then everything is off the hook. Now, we know what happened last year when Ohio State lost at home to Michigan, and everyone's calling for Ryan Day's head. Of course, he goes on to win the national title. That's why Ohio State clown Umbus fans, and they're filled with clowns, have this idiotic mindset that losing to a division rival should guarantee termination of your job. I mean, yeah, he should have lost last year to Michigan. I understand that. But you're trying to act like losing 3 times to 4 times, previous 4 years to Michigan was worthy of losing your job. I say this year he's coaching with a purpose, and probably Saturday at the Big House was probably the best game he coached, simply because he wanted to win, and he was coaching with a purpose. Of course, he had his 2 top receivers healthy, Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate, and Justin Sand had a heck of a game against a pretty solid Michigan defense. But Ryan Day coached with a purpose, coached with a want to win, and certainly did that. Probably the best game he's coached in the last 5 years. We talk about what he did on the way beating Michigan Saturday, and now they're going to have Indiana coming up. And I'm telling you, that Big Ten championship Saturday is going to be lights out. I mean, Ohio State's going to be the favorite, rightfully so, and they're going to. I don't know if I'll make my prediction end of the week. But let's not write off this Indiana team, because what Kirk Cignetti's done to this school for the last 2 years, put them on the map as a premier school in the nation, says tons about who they are. And it says tons. That game's going to be a doozy. That might be a de facto national championship game, because after those two, I don't know who's in that conversation. I would be surprised if whatever happens here, because both teams are going to go in the college playoff. That's a no-brainer. They might meet again at some point in the college playoff, maybe for the national title, because I think they're 1 and 2, and there's no number 3. But that Big Ten championship Saturday in Indianapolis between these two teams is going to be lights out. May the best team win. And speaking of the college playoff, this goes to you guys down south, and I'm talking about down south, because that's what you can do right now in Texas. We have cowards in Texas who think the Texas Longhorns are worthy of a college playoff spot. And we know what the coward Steve Sarkisian said: say it would be a disservice if it don't get in. Let's start with this. Here's a real disservice. Texas wasn't man enough to beat Ohio State. Texas lost to a 3-8 Florida team. Texas quit against Georgia, and they needed overtime to beat Kentucky. Think about that. They weren't man enough to beat Ohio State. They lost to a 3-8 Florida team. They quit against Georgia, and they lost to and needed overtime to beat the University of Kentucky. That's not even formula for a college playoff team. I mean, you're basically, if you're resorting to say it's a disservice on national television, you're basically begging at this point, and the college committee should listen to it or should acknowledge it, because you have a fake Manning as your starting quarterback. You didn't show you weren't man enough to beat Ohio State. That requires an explanation. You lost to a 3-8 Florida team who fired their head coach almost midway through the season, and we know what type of a dumpster fire that Florida program is when it comes to its football. You quit against Georgia, and I mean quit, and you won earlier this year against Kentucky. Against Kentucky, you needed it on a game-winning field goal in overtime. That's not a resume for a playoff appearance. And you cowards in Texas can go down south, because that's where you belong. Down south, because you don't deserve a shot in the playoffs. And you guys are just cowards as a result. I mean, if you quit against Georgia, you can't beat Ohio State, and you're losing to 3-8 teams, forget it. And you have a fake Manning as your starting quarterback, that's also another problem. Forget it. You don't belong. You just shut it and go down south, where you rightfully belong. I have a lot of friends in the state of Texas, not with the Longhorn fans, but I hate to do that to you guys. But some of you guys are acting like cowards again, and you guys might need to go down south, plain and simple. And of course, the big news before I go into boxing is, of course, the one everybody's wondering about, what's going to happen with Lane Kiffin. He takes a job at LSU. It's simple. You got to win it all. You wanted to go to LSU. You got it. Shut your mouth and go win it all. You're a diva. You're a drama queen. You're a fake tough guy. It says a lot when Al Davis threw you under the bus when you was coaching for the Oakland Raiders, and he was right about you, because the way you are right now, you're making Al Davis look good, and that's saying a whole lot. You wanted to go to LSU, and you got it. Now, guess what? Shut your mouth, coach, and win a national title. That's all for you right now. You're a mid coach. Your record says it, and you don't know how to stay put in one place for more than 3 years. And we know what happened. You one time in the NFL, as I said, Al Davis just put you out and just turned you upside down and took it to the cleaners. And how you've acted since you left the NFL validates why Al Davis was right. And that's why you are who you are at the end of the day. You wanted to go to LSU. You got it. Now, guess what? Shut your mouth, win a national title, prove this what you wanted. And you better do it this season. Do it next season. Because if you don't do it next season, you're an embarrassment. If you're already an embarrassment, you're going to make yourself even a bigger embarrassment if you get man enough to win the national title next season. You better win it next season, because it's going to be nasty if you don't. If you get what you want, shut up and produce. I say that to all levels, to all teams, regardless. Because if you're going to get what you want, you better back it up. I encourage everybody to watch the Bullies of Baltimore and the 2000 Ravens, because the late Tony Siragusa said it best. Do what you want, but back that leap up. All you got to do. That's enough of the college football. I'll touch more on the conference title games midweek, especially the big one between Ohio State and Indy, which is going to be a barn burner. Now to the world of boxing. Big news today. Teo Lopez versus Shakur Stevenson. People wonder when it's going to be signed. It's official, January 31st. Now we get the 2026 calendar rolling. Shakur Stevenson, you haven't been man enough to get a knockout. You haven't been man enough to get a knockout. Go get a knockout, or don't be a man. It's plain and simple. I think he'll beat Teo Lopez, but if he's not man enough to get a knockout on Teo Lopez, he's no longer a man. It's plain and simple. Get the knockout on Teo Lopez. You want to put yourself in that pound-for-pound category? Get the knockout. You haven't had a knockout, I don't know how long. And you're now basically fighting a Teo Lopez who's checked out for a while, who was trying to get a fight with Terrence Crawford for the longest time. But Terrence Crawford had bigger fish to fry. We all know that. But Shakur Stevenson, you want to be a top 5 pound-for-pound fighter? I mean, you have pound-for-pound talent. I mean, you're top 10. It's a no-brainer. But if you want to go to that next level, get a knockout. And if you don't get a knockout, you're no longer a man. It's plain and simple. Go out there, get a knockout, knock out Teo Lopez. I don't know if you're going to do that. You will win. You will beat Teo Lopez, because Teo Lopez is not nowhere near your league. But go to the next level and get a knockout. Because if you don't knock out Teo Lopez, you're no longer a man. That's what I got to say. You wanted this fight. You got it. Now get a knockout, produce, and show the whole world why you're Shakur Stevenson. Top 10 pound-for-pound talent, but get a knockout. And if you don't get a knockout, you're no longer a man. That's what I have to say about that. I'll touch more on that fight as it gets closer. Glad to see the 2026 calendar rolling, especially this fight, which has been talked about for the longest time. Lots of verbiage both ways. Lots of verbiage from the trainers both ways. And, of course, we have Eddie Hearn and Bob Arum. They're going at it, as always. It's going to be a fun fight. But for Shakur Stevenson to get to that next level, he better get a knockout. That's what it has to be said. And speaking of knockouts, we're going to go back 69 years to the Chicago Stadium in Chicago, Illinois. This is Floyd Patterson versus Archie Moore. Lots of history on that one. This one. For Patterson, it was his chance to become the youngest heavyweight champ in boxing history, going against Archie Moore, the longtime reigning light heavyweight champ, who was looking to become the first light heavyweight to win the heavyweight championship. Before we were introduced to a fellow named Mike Tyson, and of course, Cus D'Amato. Cus D'Amato had a figure of a similar sort from the same part of Mike Tyson's town, a kid named Floyd Patterson, who, like Tyson, fought out of the peekaboo stance, quick, the lethal left hook, and just brought it all. And going against Archie Moore, who after this long reign as the light heavyweight champ, made the move to heavyweight. You got a couple wins. This was for a vacant heavyweight championship after Rocky Marciano retired and vacated it. And the winner was going to make history of some sorts. Floyd Patterson, if he won it, was going to be the youngest heavyweight champ. Archie Moore was going to be the first reigning light heavyweight champ to win the heavyweight championship. So there was a lot of history on this one 69 years ago at the old Chicago Stadium. Story of this one, and it's pretty simple. Archie Moore showed his age. It was youth versus experience. But the experience problem was he was experienced, but he showed his age, being Archie Moore. And Floyd Patterson capitalized and just kept pressing, took control of the fight early, was too quick, too slick, the left hooks, did everything he wanted to. And at the end of the fifth round, it was a left hook that sent Moore to the canvas. Moore managed to get up. Another combination that put Moore down and out for the count. And Floyd Patterson, on this night 69 years ago at the old Chicago Stadium in Chicago, Illinois, became the youngest heavyweight champion of boxing history at the time at age 21 to win the undisputed heavyweight championship when he basically just dominated Archie Moore from start to finish. And a terrific, really a performance of perfection from the Patterson angle because he did everything he wanted to. Moore was basically on the defensive for the most part, but Patterson kept him on the defensive and made sure he stayed defensive. And because of that, that's why he got the knockout. And that's why Floyd Patterson rose to the top of the heavyweight division. Floyd Patterson, an interesting tale. We talk about his career. I mean, some of his wins were great. Of course, we know his staple was the trilogy with Ignomar Johansson. But a case of a fighter who was a case for excitement when you think about it. And we think about the trilogy with Johansson and what he did to Archie Moore on this night. That's what he was. He was all about excitement. Problem with him was against that trilogy against Johansson, and eventually when he lost to Sonny Liston and Muhammad Ali, once he was found out, that was it. I mean, very curious case of a fighter who, he was like Mike Tyson almost, because he came from the Customato, training. I don't know what to be the word to use for it, but came from the Customato school, and it was the exact same way Mike Tyson was eventually. Not the greatest chin in the world, obviously, because he had fights where even mediocre guys floored him. But we talk about Floyd Patterson and his reign, an intriguing one. We talk about especially the win over Pete Redenbacher, which set up the trilogy with Johansson. But this win over Moore and the trilogy with Johansson was symbolizing who Floyd Patterson was. An exciting fighter who brought a punch, but for a guy who fought at the stance that he did, was easier to hit than people thought. But certainly brought one of those kind of styles that got your attention. And that's what Floyd Patterson did. And we talk about what he did on this night. Of course, this was later surpassed by Mike Tyson when he beat Trevor Berbick, making history, being the youngest to ever win the title, considering his background out of the streets of Brooklyn, New York, like Tyson was, says to the dedication of how great Floyd Patterson was. And we talked about his run, intriguing run. And after he won the title and after the trilogy with Ignomar Johansson, whereas a case of bodies hitting the floor, maybe you could say I don't want to say him and Customato checked out, but knowing that Sonny Liston was his mandatory contender, they did everything in the book to prolong it. And that's why his career wound up the way it did. We know that happened when he fought Liston twice, both times blown out in the first round, but it was the Sonny Liston time at that point. But one of the more intriguing stories and one of the more intriguing careers, maybe a case for Floyd Patterson, this was his finest hour, and we know the whole Johansson trilogy. Maybe some of his best performances came after the Johansson trilogy, and still turned out to be a top 20 all-time great heavyweight. And didn't have the outside the ring antics like Tyson did, but when we think about the two parallels, how they came up in the game through the Customato regimen, interesting parallels, something I would advise everybody to look at. Now for Archie Moore, it was basically the end for him, if you want to call it that. because he never got to that level ever again. Fought a few more times. Last fight, he lost to he eventually lost to Muhammad Ali himself when he was floored in 4 rounds and he retired. But I said all along, his reign was at light heavyweight, arguably a top 5 all-time great light heavyweight. We talk about a guy, an Archie Moore, who got better as he got older. We always compare the all-time great light heavyweights. We talk about Ezra Charles, Billy Conn, and himself. Maybe it's a case for Archie Moore, greatness due to longevity, but as he was getting greater, he found a way to be greater in a ways that made you know he was greater as he got older. And that's what happened with Archie Moore. Just with this fight, when he fought the standout Floyd Patterson, who was 19 years younger than him, he was in over his head because Floyd Patterson was coming to win the heavyweight title that night in Chicago, and he did it. But Archie Moore's greatness was more at light heavyweight because he did fight once, losing to Rocky Marciano for a title. Also fought Cassius Clay down the line, lost to him in 4 rounds. But his place in light heavyweight history, forever secure. You talk about top 5 all-time great light heavyweight. We talk about guys like Ezra Charles, Billy Conn, Archie Moore, Bob Foster, and Michael Spinks. That's the class, and Archie Moore certainly is the class. One of those guys I was talking about with George Foreman, and you could probably say Bernard Hopkins is also a case of this. A fighter who found a way to escalate himself in history as he got older, and that's what he did as a light heavyweight. Who could say that when they get to their mid-40s? I mean, Archie Moore, George Foreman, Bernard Hopkins. That's probably the list. Maybe a couple of others in there, but those 3, especially Archie Moore, did that. Unfortunately for this night, he ran into a buzzsaw named Floyd Patterson, who just obliterated him in less than 5 rounds to make history, becoming the youngest heavyweight champion of all time. That was not the only history Floyd Patterson made. Fast forward a couple years after he lost the title to Ingemar Johansson, he fought Johansson again, regained the heavyweight championship, and was the first to do that. So Floyd Patterson did a lot of firsts. His real first came on this night 69 years ago at Chicago Stadium when he just obliterated Archie Moore. And maybe an underrated all-time great heavyweight that's not talked about enough. I mean, no one's going to put him in the upper echelon because his resume still lacks in some areas, but made history, probably had a top 5 all-time great heavyweight trilogy with Johansson, and that alone puts him in the category of the all-time greats. And certainly his work in the New York State Athletic Commission after he retired validates just who Floyd Patterson was. Not a terrific fighter in the ring, but a great contributor outside of it, and a terrific humanitarian as a human being. May God rest the soul of the great Floyd Patterson. Terrific, terrific heavyweight. And I conclude with a lot of drama. And this one is the epitome of, when I say boxing, I tell you, what I'm about to talk about is the epitome of it. And this one took place 49 years ago at the Spectrum in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And this had all the goods. And this is for you conspiracy theorists, especially Bengals fans, because what happened this night epitomizes who Bengals fans are. But this is before they came around, because we had fight fans doing this exact same thing 49 years ago. It was Alfredo Escalera going to the backyard of Tyrone Everett for defense of a super featherweight title. This, one of the more wild stories in our sport, is always going to be Tyrone Everett because of some of his weird affiliations. And I mean weird. I won't discuss the details. You can research that yourself. I mean weird. We talk about what the life he lived and the affiliations he had with the mafia and the mob. And he had a lot of affiliations with it. And we talk about how he got to this point. Yes, a French all-time great and Alfredo Escalera. He got what he wanted at the side of the title. If you're a free modern guy, he was like a poor, at that time, a poor man's Pernell Whitaker. You can probably say closest to him, maybe a Shakur Stevenson before Shakur Stevenson stopped knocking people out. That's what Tyrone Everett was. A slick southpaw, hard to hit. Maybe a smaller Chris Bird if you want to go that far, because that's what he was. So he faces this phenom named Alfredo Escalera, and who's a multiple world champion. And we talk about this particular night. This was a case of everything we see in the sport. One fighter dominates, which is what Everett pretty much did. Showed his boxing skill. Escalera had his moments, but the fight was controlled from start to finish by Everett. And we know the story of this one. Some way, somehow, 2 of the 3 judges scored this fight for Escalera, and 1 judge had this fight even. And some way, somehow, Alfredo Escalera escapes Philadelphia with a decision. Let's get to the fun part. Back then, it wasn't 3 judges to fight followers. Not just it was 2 judges and a referee. The referee of this fight scored 9 rounds dead even. Not 1 round even, not 2 rounds even. 9 rounds, 10-10, dead even. How is that even plausible? I mean, let's start with that. Here's the other part that's wild. The Philadelphia judge had Escalera winning this one going away. And the third fight, judge had the draw, which even that is disputable. And of course, the chaos ensues afterwards, where the Everett people murdered the ring announcer to get the scorecards in disbelief. And the Spectrum in Philadelphia caused a hell of a wild scene where everything was thrown all over the place. And you want to talk about chaos in the boxing biz? I'm not a conspiracy theorist, okay? Anybody knows me, I don't partake in this sports is rigged, sports is fixed sort of thing. Never have, never will. But when you read some of the details of what took place between Alfredo Escalera and Tyrone Everett over in Philadelphia and how it came about before, during, and after, makes you think. It really does. I won't go that far, but it makes you think. Nobody can be that stupid. I mean, I watched this fight, maybe 3 rounds tops. Alfredo Escalera won. I mean, this is like a poor version of what Pernell Whitaker did to Jose Luis Ramirez in 1988. And we know what happened with that one. The only difference was Alfredo Escalera won rounds. Jose Luis Ramirez didn't win rounds. But he only won 2 rounds, which doesn't say much. And to have this wild scene take place in Philadelphia after all of this, and having respected beat writers come out and say they had it in the bag and they had it, already for the fight for Escalera before the fight started, that should tell you something. It says a whole lot. Listen, I'm not the guy to say conspiracy theorists. I think that it's just for losers like Bengals fans. But when you talk about the officiating of this night and how one judge basically just said, I'll just score 9 even rounds for the hell of it, makes you wonder what happened. I was on a cross-country show last summer, and we talked about some of the worst decisions in boxing history. I had this one in the middle of the pack. If I had to do over with this, I should have this one higher. Because there's no freaking way you can tell me, any way, shape, or form, that Alfredo Escalera won more than 3 rounds. And it wasn't the fact that Tyrone Everett was robbed. He was robbed due to complete laziness. How do you score a fight with 9 even rounds? And a fight where you're watching it live, it's happening right in front of your face. And you just say, okay, this round's even, that round's even, and that round's even. How do you explain that? Because that's something still today the deep hardcore boxing aficionados cannot wrap their heads around. I mean, they talk about, Harold Letterman. I mean, HBO, for the long time HBO followers know who Harold Letterman is. He called this the worst decision of boxing history. That says something. And I said, I had this in the middle, but I should have probably had this higher, given everything that took place before, during, and after the fight. You could probably say they had it in the bag for Escalera. I'm not going to go that far because I don't know what the criteria is for it. Because I said, I'm not one of those guys that say sports is fixed. I need more proof. But something real fishy took place in Philadelphia, and the world smelled it. And it was just a nasty smell when you talk about what took place with this. And there's all kinds of chaos afterwards, where it's a man for an immediate rematch. But that didn't happen because, they wanted bigger fish to fry, being the Escalera camp, knowing they got away with one. And we talk about what happened after this. They did finally settle for a rematch, but days after the rematch, Tyrone Everett was murdered by his girlfriend, who saw him doing other things. I'm not going to discuss those. I don't use my platform for it, but you can figure it out for itself. They had the rematch set, but Tyrone Everett was murdered. Tyrone Everett, here's the thing. We see this for a lot of fighters. Maybe at a lesser level, Tyrone Everett's probably an example of this. And we said this with many fighters like Mike Tyson, Riddick Bowe, et cetera, et cetera. You have those kind of affiliations the way Tyrone Everett had. And you do those things with those kind of characters. I didn't say people, I said characters. I'll let you guys figure it out, especially in the political world. It starts with the letter T. You have that sort of thing. And once you try to invest in this secretive, discreet, almost double lifestyle, and a lot of fighters are guilty of this. The second that opens, once that this discretion starts to open, you can't close it up. That's what happened with Tyrone Everett. We're talking about with him out of the ring before, during, and after the fight. Now, yes, he should he have gotten the rightful decision against Escalera? Yes, that's a no-brainer. That is a 100% no-brainer. But everything that happened to him before, during, and after, with that secretive discretion that he lived, the second it opened up, it was a hot mess. And once he was caught, that was the end. Granted, odd circumstances. And when you talk about this decision, one of the bigger tragedies is Alfredo Escalera has a case for being a boxing Hall of Famer, and this is used against him. They remind you, he's a silent fighter, gave the great Alexis Aguayo one of the tougher fights of his career. Certainly a good fighter, and you might say he's a Hall of Famer. But that decision against Everett is held over his head, as if he basically went to the largest bank in the history of society, robbed it blind, and flew the country. That's how it's held against him. Yeah, he lost to Tyrone Everett. It's a no-brainer. He lost to Tyrone Everett and lost bad. I mean, it was probably at best a ninth, I think it was a 15-round fight. It was in probably the area of 12-3, maybe 11-3, around that category. But the fact that people hold this against him is interesting, because this falls on all the business and the mobs. Because back then, it wasn't the high-power promoters like Don King, Bob Arum, or like we see today with Eddie Hearn taking over the fights. It was real-life crime mobs and mafia mobs, especially the angle of Tyrone Everett, who controlled the fights. And the feeling is that control, because something they didn't like in Tyrone Everett, was why everything happened that night in Philadelphia. Probably just in terms of overall controversy, and we had a lot of controversies all the time. We all know this. I mean, I could stuff a house full of boxing controversies. Maybe the most chaotic controversy in boxing history, given what took place before, during, and after. And you want to talk about being robbed blind? That's what happened. My biggest mistake was not having this higher, because I read about it, but now I got a chance to do this before tonight and watch it. Holy crap. That's what I have to say about that. Because Tyrone Everett should have been the rightful winner. Now, what the things that changed had he gotten the decision? Probably not, because his outside the ring lifestyle validated the secret of this discretion he was living, almost like a closed door, almost like he had some kind of social anxiety in his way. But the second it opened and the world saw it, they went after him, especially his lover, and we know what happened. Odd story. It's a sad story, obviously, but also odd. It also epitomizes a lot of the oddities we've had, maybe not just in boxing history, but maybe in all of sports. I can point to a boatload of examples, but I'm not even going to go there. But Tyrone Everett, 49 years ago tonight in Philadelphia, was victimized by whatever word you want to use to describe it, because he was victimized bad. How you have one judge score 9 even rounds in a fight, and a hometown judge who gave it to Escalera going away, when they saw out of their own 2 eyes who was a rightful winner. Yeah, rematch was set, probably should have been immediately, but after it was set, all chaos ensued. I mean, not a conspiracy theorist, but you do the math on that one, I can see why people make the claims they do about this fight, because Everything is there. Doesn't help the fact that Tyrone Everett lived the lifestyle he lived outside of it. But, you know, it is what it is. Hard to talk about because neither guy hit the next level platform. But I try to talk about the stuff without all of the ugliness because there was a lot of ugliness with this fight, especially on the Tyrone Everett angle. But it's hard to because of how he was. And he was a slick southpaw. Almost like for you guys, I Pernell Whitaker, Chris Bird-esque. I mean, that's what he was pretty much. Maybe a poor version of that. And he basically did a Escalera. What Whitaker did to Jose Luis Ramirez, and what Chris Bird did to David Tua. I mean, basically the same thing. And he didn't get credit for it. Maybe they were trying to milk any type of dollar they can off of him. And when it came to opportunity, because things opened up to just throw him under the bus, that's why we had what took place at the Spectrum in Philadelphia. And it's still the all-time mystery of all-time mysteries in boxing. And I still can't wrap my head around it. I mean, I said I should have had this as a higher all-time robbery on my robbery list when I did a cross-country show last summer. But I didn't because some of the ones on my two I saw. I mean, I didn't see much of this until I learned about it after the show last year. And still, it's not just the fact that he was victimized. It was how he was victimized. High score basically every round and even round. And my guess is either total negligence, total incompetence, or something on the side that we don't know about. But whatever it is history. But it's history that still has everybody asking every question in the book. That's what happened 49 years ago. Wild lifestyle for Tyrone Everett. I mean, you guys should figure it out. I don't use my platform to discuss what he did because it was wild. It was a closed, discreet lifestyle. And the second he opened it and everyone knew about it, that's why everything with him ended the way it did. I can probably talk about more of this more down the line. Always going to be questions. And on that note, that will wrap up this edition of Sir Hunt on X. Tomorrow night, I relive a wild doubleheader on a free TV network. But little did we know, this doubleheader involved two fighters whose career paths led to a super event down the line. Lots to talk about tomorrow night, and I'm going to have some fun with this. And on that note, that'll wrap up tonight's show. If you missed tonight's or any other episode, you can watch it on the Apple Podcast, the iHeartRadio, and the Spotify apps. And one last time for you Texas Longhorn morons, you guys don't deserve the spot in the college playoffs. You can go down south because that's where you belong. And as always, make self-care your number one priority in all walks of life. Take care of yourselves first before you take care of anything else. If you take care of yourself, respect other people's boundaries, and defend your own boundaries, that's the only thing that matters, and all the good things will come your way. Always take care of you first. Have a good rest of the night. Take care of yourselves. God bless, and I will see you tomorrow.